ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and my guest this evening is the Senator from Essex District 2, Joan Lovely. Welcome, Senator Lovely. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, George. I'm happy to be here.
And basically what it comes down to, I think, is I'm quite concerned about these carbon taxes that are showing up. The ones that are directly applicable, and then the ones that they're buried in there someplace. And I think would like to see if we could start with an agreement that eventually all taxes are paid by the consumer. Even if it's a tax directly applied to the business, they just pass it on as part of their cost of doing business. It shows up in the price, and they end up just collecting taxes for the government. So everything happens, it comes down to something, how does it affect the consumer? And the other part of this game that bothers me is there's an awful lot of these carbon taxes that are starting to be pushed around. And I guess my concern is, what's the feeling in Boston and in your perspective of how serious are these things? How actively should they be, or aggressively should they be pushed, or should we just stop and think, let's put this in perspective?
Well, thank you. You know what, since you raised the structure of taxes, let me just give you and your viewers an update. The Senate put together last session a tax review committee that will take a look at our entire tax structure, how it happens here in Massachusetts. So from income tax, sales tax, hotel motel tax, you name it, we're going to look at every single tax. Corporate taxes included, to really assess where we are with the tax structure, for our own state compared to other states. And so where do we make some responsible changes to our tax structure? So I am not on that committee, but I've been following the work closely. They're not done yet. They brought it into this new session. As you can imagine, the pandemic interrupted a lot of our work in 2020 as we pivoted to respond to the crisis. So, but their work continues, and I look forward to them finishing that work and then really have that tax conversation. What does it look like here in Massachusetts? With regard to, carbon taxes in particular, and climate change. So Massachusetts, I would consider is a leader among a few states that are taking a hard look at this. You know that over here in Salem, we had a coal power plant on our shoreline, coal and oil, for the better part of 50, 60 years. And it's gone, and now has been replaced with a natural gas plant that has a lifespan to it as we move towards renewable energies, right? So hydropower, solar power, wind power. And we're actually having that conversation right now about putting a marshalling plant, offshore wind marshalling plant right next to the power plant to be able to support offshore wind, so that we get to these, what we call cleaner renewables, and get away from, frankly, having to have this discussion about climate taxes and carbon taxes. Carbon taxes are really intended to kind of change behavior so that we can move towards clean energy. But that's going to take decades to get us there. And so, just this past month, last month, the Senate and House passed the Next Generation Climate Roadmap bill. And that gives a roadmap on how we get there by 2050. The goal is to be net zero energy by 2050. What does that mean? To be carbon free, that we don't get any of our power sources from carbon. And also our gasoline, to power our cars, or diesel, or whatever it might be. So to get to, to have that, so we are not a polluter in our country. And it has many layers, you're right, many layers on how to get there, whether we're looking at it from the standpoint of, building We're looking at our, the building codes to make sure that buildings are more efficient, so that they're not requiring as much heating and cooling costs, if you will. We're looking at the transportation system, which, as we know, is the biggest polluter on the planet. When we get in our cars every day, those are the biggest polluters, are our vehicles. So again, to try to get to all electric vehicles. Now those are costly. I can't afford an electric vehicle, not right now. So those costs are going to have to come down to get the average consumer like me and you to be able to afford that, to be able to afford it. So, these are the things we're looking at. Now, I had a really great opportunity last session to sit on the ocean acidification. It was a special legislative commission on ocean acidification, what's happening right out in the Massachusetts Bay. So we looked at it really from the Massachusetts-New Hampshire border all the way down to the Rhode Island border, and quite a bit at Cape Cod, because we know that our fishermen, many make their livelihoods from fishing, from collecting oysters and clams and and lobsters and things that we enjoy as consumers. We enjoy consuming, and because of climate change, because of carbon that is being put into our water, the ocean actually absorbs carbon, and it changes the pH of the water, and it changes the chemical structure. And so what do we have? We have clam beds and oyster beds that are dying off. They're not, these little seedling clams and oysters, for example, aren't able to put a shell on, because when you change the pH of the water, it affects the calcium in the clamshell. And so if we do nothing, we will lose well within 100 years all of those opportunities to be able to survive on these types of shellfish and and marine life that frankly is a part of our food chain. So that was very very educational for me. I didn't really know a lot about it. I know a little more about it. I'm far from an expert. We rely on experts. So, as we make these decisions to look at climate change, to make decisions about a carbon tax, if you will, we make it with the goals of getting to net zero, when we won't have to have a carbon tax anymore, because we will be essentially operating carbon free.
Well,
That is where we'd like to get.
the part of the problem that this gets to me is they talk about a lot of opportunities and ways to get there. And what I think is being totally ignored is some of the unintended consequences of some of these solutions. For instance, you mentioned hydropower. There's a tremendous source of hydropower, which is probably the best of the bunch, because it's carbon free and it's continuous. And trying to get that cable in from Canada has been a free-for-all for, I can remember, at least 5 to 10 years of discussions about how we're going to do it. No, it looks ugly. It's not important. So there's a disconnect in my mind between some people who have an idea that carbon-free is great, and some people that don't really respond to that very positively. And you mentioned about electric cars and the concern that you and I both have, that those things are terribly expensive right now.
Yeah.
Beverly just leased 2 electric buses, and they got a good deal out of it, because they leased them for the same price of leasing a diesel bus, even though an electric bus costs twice as much. Well, it sounds like a good deal until you start to wonder, how does this make sense economically when they're getting $24,000 a year in lease fees, and in about 6 years, they're going to have to replace the batteries. So 24,000 a year times 6 years is 144,000 bucks. That's nice. The difference in price between an electric bus and a diesel bus is something like $250,000. You can't afford to even replace the batteries, let alone amortize the cost of the bus. So there's one of these taxes that I call them. It's a fee that's buried someplace called a subsidy. And we just can't afford to do this kind of stuff.
Well, and I would argue that we can't afford not to because of, then you're right, it's a fee. There's a cost. You're absolutely right. And it's because of, there's the the Salem Sound Coast Watch. Okay, Salem Sound Coast Watch is an organization, based here in Salem, but it is the entire North Shore. I would encourage your viewers to go on and take a look. They did a study on what it would look like if we did nothing to work towards climate change on flooding in this area. And Salem Willows would be gone in less than 50 years. It'll be gone underwater. And there's several other, a lot of shoreline that will gobble up homes and businesses because our oceans are rising. We know that. That's a fact. So, I look at Massachusetts to do its part. I would look to every state to do its part. Not, there are still states, primarily in the towards the south, that still burn coal. It's a very dirty fuel to burn that adds to the warming of our planet. But you know what? There's also other ways that we could do this too. I'm actually going to be attending a study, a webinar, if you will, during school vacation week, virtual, of course, on carbon sequestration and how you can actually put the carbon back into the ground. So I'm really excited about that because we need to find ways. You're right. That big cable coming down from Massachusetts, from Canada to Massachusetts, is the only way we're going to get that hydropower and to be able to work towards our carbon-free status. And there are a couple of states. I think New Hampshire said absolutely not. Maine is not real thrilled about it either. We do have, there's ways to get a cable down. You could come right down a major highway and put it right underground. It's called horizontal directional drilling. So you're not, disrupting, woods and forests and mountains. We have a major highway that goes right up through New Hampshire and Maine, and put it right underground, right down the middle of the highway. I've heard that so many times. So we don't disrupt, and we can get to that resource of hydropower. But you're right. If there are commitments that need to be made to get there, and so what do those commitments mean? What is the cost? And so this new bill that the governor just signed, has commitments in there to take a look at that. Now, I'm not a big fan of the gas tax. I actually am a big fan of tolling the roads because if you use the road, you pay for the road. And, George, if you go to New Hampshire or Maine, well, New Hampshire, then to Maine, you hit a toll in Hampton. And if you're going to Maine, as soon as you hit the Maine Turnpike, you're hitting another toll. And you don't have that in Massachusetts. When you're returning, to your state, to our Commonwealth, we have no tolls. But think of all of the people that live in southern New Hampshire and Maine, but work in Massachusetts. They pay their state every time they go back a toll towards their roads, but they don't pay, to come into Massachusetts to work. And I think everybody should pay if you're using the roads. And I'll give you one more example, is that people that come up from the South Coast and the Cape every day to come into work. Now, right now, that's not happening, but it was. And we anticipate it'll get back to some hybrid of that. Again, no toll, but I have myself and my constituents, I go through the tunnel to go to work. I pay a toll. So, let's just make it equitable and fair is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's been one of Elliot Margolis's favorites. There's a toll to get into Boston from the north side, but not from the south side. But the other concerns I have is people blindly just talk about, we're going to go carbon free. Germany tried this, and they shut down all their nukes too, because they were concerned about the hazard of nuclear power plants, and their carbon dioxide emissions went up because lo and behold, the sun don't shine all the time and the wind don't blow all the time, and they had to turn on their coal-fired power plants because that's all they had left.
Mhm.
And you mentioned about the coal plants in the South. One of the problems we've got in this country is such a negative attitude towards coal. And yet, if you dig into the DOE, Department of Energy, uh, they got plans for a coal gasification plant, which is the hybrid plant, the combination of gas turbine and plain old coal-fired boiler that has an efficiency of 61%, which is very, very good comparing to even the natural gas powered plants. So there are options around that I don't think are being explored as well. And people have got a very narrow focus on how they want to do things. The other one that blew my mind this morning, getting ready to have this discussion, I went through the calculations looking at the governor's plan to say he wants to have I think 1 million houses that are all electric by 2035 or some number like that. And I asked for a quote, and I got a quote to convert my house to electric heat, and it's something between $7,000 and $14,000, depending on how they do it. And then on top of that, I got to convert all my appliances from gas to electric. We'll put another couple of thousand in there. Then I calculated the heat bill, and it's going to be 5 times the cost of natural gas. This does not make sense on an economic basis when what we're talking about is carbon dioxide is plant food. It's not a pollutant. And that's part of the problem, that people put labels on it that I don't think they know what they're talking about.
Well, let me talk about the plant food. It is, but you have to have the plants. And, we're in South America, especially, just being decimated.
Yeah.
So we definitely need large, like, country size, forestation and plants to be able to absorb that carbon dioxide. And the more that these types of lands are taken over for farming, which is exactly what happened in this country when it was founded, when before it was our country, so we're going to end up having more carbon than we can take care of. We are taking a look at that. And I'm sorry, what was your other question, George? Because you made a good point, and I wanted to touch on that about the cost of carbon. Oh, I know what it was. You're right. We have to phase into this because we live in the Northeast, where most of the winter we have cloud cover, right?
Yeah.
So solar's not going to work. Wind should be able to work year round. And if there's talk of doing the wind farms down off the Cape, but also in the Gulf of Maine, which is where we're right there at the Gulf of Maine, to be able to put these so that they're far offshore. They're actually floating turbines. And that's why I was talking about that marshalling operation next to Footprint, to be able to allow those to be assembled and then towed out to sea, to provide us with that power, because those things will spin 24/7 and provide us with clean power. We have to get there, and you talked about, was it Germany? We're not closing down nuclear power plants, but Brayton Point closed because it was at the end of its life, time. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the other one too. Is I'm a little more familiar with that wind farm that's off the coast of Block Island, and the numbers on that thing are atrocious. That it has enough power to handle 2,000 homes, and you go through the arithmetic of the cost of it divided by 2,000 homes, that's $150,000 per house. That is another one of these things that, gee, it sounds great. We're going to get all this free energy because the wind just blows and the turbine runs. And these wind turbines have a life expectancy of about 20 years. And right now, there is no neat way to get rid of those turbine blades when they have to be replaced. So what I'm concerned about is we're getting into this thing without thinking it through thoroughly. And the issues that are really there that, yeah, there's probably a solution to it. But what I'm missing is what's the solution?
Well, if we do nothing, we're going to be, you know, the weather on this planet is going to continue to accelerate. We're already in a drought condition here. You know, we had no snow cover this winter. We had very little last winter. So our seasons are changing. And I'm just talking about right here. I mean, you go to the south and they're flooding. So, you know, these are fairly new phenomenon, you know, for in the last century. You know, so and it's a direct result of our impact on our planet. So, but you're right, it comes at a cost. I cannot deny that it comes at a cost, and we need these technologies and to more mass produce so these costs come down. So, but there needs to be the need for it as well and the commitment to do it. So, but I think you're right. The upfront costs, there'll be a commitment there. And then as we continue to grow our renewables and wean ourselves from fossil fuels, you know, our air is going to be cleaner. Our oceans will hopefully come back. It's not in our lifetime, George. You know, I have a 5-month-old granddaughter. It's in her lifetime. And I don't know what that's going to look like, you know, 50 years from now.
Yeah, I'll see your 5-month-old granddaughter. I got a 1-year-old great grandson. So yeah, I understand the concern, and we're already starting to fill up his college fund with the wherewithal, thinking that's probably the way to go. But at the same time, I think there is a concern about pollution. You talk about the old coal-fired power plant that used to be there in Salem. I can remember when I first moved to Beverly, we always had this black dust on the windowsills. And oh yeah, it's the coal-fired thing. Well, they got their act together, and after a while, they put the scrubbers in and cleaned up their act, and it got to be reasonably clean. And I think this is the kind of exercise that we're going to have to go through of how do we solve these problems. And one of the other ones that really bugs me is I listened to Eisenhower's excuse me, Atoms for Peace speech in 1953, and I got all gung ho. I went to college to become a nuclear engineer, and I was interviewing with P&W to get on their nuclear airplane engine program. And the guy I was interviewing was trying to talk me out of it because they were shutting it down. And you think about the clams that attacked the Seabrook plant and all the rest of these, and just with very little real information, turned off a very good opportunity for lots of what you would call very clean power. That's no carbon dioxide included. And every time we have one of these nuclear power plants going to be considered, the hassle they have to go through with environmental impact statements, which are really just delaying action, are part of the problem that there is no real consensus, I think, about what are we really trying to fix. There are the environmentalists that are fighting the cable coming down from Canada, and a lot of these other issues. You want to talk about something for the erosion on the beaches and protecting the coastline. Oh no, you can't build a barrier wall out there. It looks ugly, and it goes on and on. So I think this is part of our problem, that we got to get our act together totally. What do we really want to do? What are we really willing to commit to doing it. And like you were mentioning earlier, there's going to be an expensive upfront cost, and hopefully, if we get enough of these things going, wind turbines, solar cells, whatever you want to talk about, there's a way to do it. And one of the things that bothers me is you mentioned farming is a problem. That's went through an interesting article talking about China and their farming. They're doing it in greenhouses, much more efficient, much more productive, and a lot neater, cleaner, and much more versatile year-round kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of technical opportunities that need to be explored, and people need to get into the mood of, hey, there could be a better way to do this, and not necessarily what they're thinking. So,
You know, I wanted to bring up one more thing. You brought up farming, George, and I'm so glad that you did, because one of the pieces of this climate bill we just did, and a piece of pollution that we talk about, but is methane gas from all the cattle that are raised across the earth to feed us, right?
Yep.
Meat. An enormous amount of methane gas. It's a huge polluter, and so in this bill is to support anaerobic digesters, so to put an anaerobic digesters on farms, so you can actually break down the methane gas before it gets into the air. You can break down the byproduct of all these cows, and then you can make compost. So, I mean, that's a big polluter too, right there, that we're talking about.
There's a lot of these issues, I think, that need to be explored. And believe it or not, we've had a half hour of fun. And again, thank you very much, and appreciate you spending the time with us this evening. And I think we need to do this again because there's more to be discussed. And I don't think we've gotten to a position yet of understanding where we're going and how we're going to get there. And that's what the legislature is all about, to thrash it out, I guess.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to invite you back sometime in the future to see how it's going, if you don't mind.
I would very much enjoy that, George, and thank you for the time to be with you today and for your listeners. And let's continue the discussion and see. You're right. Peel back the layers and see where we're going. See if we're successful.